in Albany. 2 weeks, no drugs, no alcohol. And boy, I thought I had arrived. And not knowing that it's not that easy. Not knowing that money was a trigger. These are things that I learned after. But once I got my first unemployment check, I remember cashing the check, and I wound up in a liquor store. And when I say wound up in a liquor store, literally not planning to go to the liquor store, but wound up in the liquor store. And I remember buying a small nip bottle of Bacardi, and I remember drinking that. And after drinking that Bacardi, I remember walking the streets of Albany trying to cop. And I copped. And I remember them, what I thought then was overcharging me for the drugs. And I was able to use some of my skills and kind of like talk them down a little bit, but it wasn't like what I was used to spending back home. However, it took off, and I had spent all of that and all my money, and I remember having to tell my girlfriend and wasn't able to stay there anymore. So I moved to Troy, to the Women's Y in Troy, and I took me to the Women's Y in Troy, not understanding. Never lived in a community environment such as that one, so I you know, they had rules and regulations there, and I defied each one of them. And I used, and I came, and I went as I pleased, and I used, and I came, and I went as I pleased, and I guess the tenants there got really upset and started complaining. And at that point, there was an intervention done by the director of the Y. And I remember her, this is in December. This was in December 29th. I remember her knocking on the room door of my room, knocking on the door and asked to speak to me. And I went downstairs and I spoke to her. And she didn't ask me, but she told me that I needed to get some help if I wanted to stay there. And I remember being real speechless. I wasn't able to defend anything that she was saying. I remember being really speechless because all I could have thought of that time that if I get thrown out of here, I have nowhere to go. And that's when I guess it all began for me. She sent me to a recovering a place, which was located right across the street from the Y, and she sent me over there, and that's when they asked me all these questions, because I need to say I never sought help with my using, never sought help, never saw anything wrong. People around me went to get help, but I didn't. So she sent me over there, and that's when it all began. They gave me an appointment to come back, and I went back, and that's when I sat in this room with all these people in a circle, and it took off from there.
So taking off from there, what's been the hardest part of recovery?
I think the hardest part of recovery for me was in the beginning not understanding what recovery was all about. That was the hardest part for me. The hardest part was not understanding what it was all about, not understanding the concept, not understanding. I was told that I had a disease, not able to understand that with disease. And I just kept showing up. I just kept showing up. Very baffled, but this was in treatment. My recovery process did not begin yet. That was in treatment. So having to understand what this thing was all about and be educated about addiction, I got that. I was introduced to that in treatment. Back then, I should say, it was imperative to go to meetings. That was part of the process, treatment. And that's when I was introduced to the recovery process and people that had similar stories. Because this was all like a big blur for me when I first came around. You know, not knowing why, you know, you used, had to go back and look at abandonment issues, had to go back and look at rejection from mom and dad. You know, dad never being in the picture, was never in the picture. So I was able to connect the dots at you know, as an adult, you know, was able to connect the dots then and understand what this journey of mine was like, you know, growing up.
What would be your message to someone watching that's still sick and suffering?
The message that I would try to put out there today is that, you know, the recovery process, like, I'm grateful for everything that I experienced from birth up until this point. I think had I not experienced what I experienced, I wouldn't be here today, first and foremost. This is not, you know, I hear some people say, recovery people say that, you know, the low self-esteem and how society might view you, and, you know, that this is the best thing that can happen. It's about giving yourself a break. There is no mistake. I don't believe that there was a mistake in the path that I experienced. And I think that if you are experiencing active addiction and you feel like you want to do something different, I think you should give yourself a break. And I think that you should, like, take direction from others that has been in this process, that's still in the process, and that's telling you that, you know what, you don't have to live this way, because you really don't.